Really, investing and sector rotation allows investors to react to market events, to take into account where we are in the business cycle, and adjust their portfolios accordingly. Because sectors have certain risk-return behaviors and patterns over time, and then you can really use them to influence the risk and returns of your own portfolio as well. It varies. I think most of the time investors are looking at the macro environment and trying to figure out, for example, in the US, where we are in the cycle. Either maybe looking at earnings, or they might be looking at what's coming up in terms of, for example, for the general elections in the US, for the president elections in the US, and what that may affect their portfolios, and is there an opportunity for them to take advantage of? So again, in Europe, it'd be a slightly different story, slightly different time in the cycle, but again, always being aware of what's happening out there. So in terms of the most popular strategies at the moment, it's really a lot of investors are looking at the macro environment and trying to position themselves for what they think is going to happen next and what are going to be the drivers of returns going forward. And there might be a difference between the US and in Europe, and having different sectors or covered with countries can allow them to take a different position depending on where they are. So investors can also use sector ETFs to build their core portfolio, to have a more strategic allocation. So they can be more active about using passive building blocks to reframe their core portfolios. And it's no longer necessary to just take whatever sector weights are in an existing index, but maybe you want to have maybe more of the defensive sectors, for example, or then have the ability to tap into the more cyclical ones later on. Investors should consider sector investing because they give them more opportunities and different ways of tapping in and investing. So if you're thinking of just style investing, you'd have value and growth, or maybe value and small cap. With sectors, you tend to have 9, 10 sectors, and they have a very well-defined risk-return profile and a certain behavior during different market environments. And it gives them more of an opportunity to add value over time. For small investors, what they think they should be doing is having a core of maybe more defensive sectors, like, for example, consumer staples, healthcare, telecoms, because what we've seen through time and in different regions as well is that these sectors tend to do better than the more cyclical ones. So if you develop yourself a more core defensive, then you can take the opportunity, a bit of a sliver of your portfolio, a small slice of your portfolio, to have more of a tactical allocation. So for example, if you think interest rates are going to go up in the US, and have a smaller allocation to financials, which tend to do better in those environments. We started this year with a lot more of a defensive positioning, and it's something that we'll touched on the presentation here. But I think what we're starting to see from the behavior of investors, Europe and the US, they are taking more a cyclical risk within their portfolios, and just taking the opportunity to sell down some of their more defensive parts of their portfolio and going into more the cyclical portfolio, and really taking advantage of maybe an improvement of the underlying conditions in the markets. Probably have the US a little bit ahead of that in terms of, for example, of some of the earnings updates we've had year to date. Europe still has its own challenges, so US might be leading the charge here in terms of having a more cyclical, an opportunity to have a more cyclical posture or positioning in your portfolio as well. I think one of the biggest risks of sector investing is sometimes investors can be tempted to do too much trading. And trading will, over time, erode returns. And also, what investors should be aware is that they need to have significant positions in these sectors for it to actually have a good impact on their portfolios. But be mindful of trading, that can erode returns over the long term, and just build positions with confidence and conviction, so that you can have the best benefit of the different return drivers in sectors. Yeah, and it is difficult to time the market, but I think investors have different tools and different sources of information that can help them make their minds and can help them take views. And also what they can be doing is doing things incremental. So for example, what I was saying, we've seen on the institutional side, investors trying to move away a little bit more from their defensive position and more to a cyclical. And this is never done overnight. This is all done on a gradual basis. So for investors as well, taking their time to reshift and position their portfolio can be helpful as well, because it's very difficult to time the perfect top or the perfect bottom of any market. What we've seen is that way you are not in an equal weighted approach to sectors, that you're developing maybe a core part of your portfolio that way. It really helps you to move away from the sector weights in an index and really saying, okay, I want to have equal exposure to all these different drivers and all these different sectors within a given region. So that way you probably have less of financials, but maybe what happens as well, you have a bit more of some of more defensive sectors, for example. It is just giving you a more a cleaner slate to start with than maybe necessarily the weights that these sectors have today in an underlying index. It depends on the investor and their appetite, but having a core, for example, on some of the returns of the results that I put in the presentation, and then he was showing a better result than the weights for the index, it was just rebalancing on a quarterly basis. Because again, you have to be mindful of turnover. The more you trade, it's good to trade, and ETFs allow you to be flexible from that standpoint, but you have to be mindful that over time it can cost you on your performance as well.